Ant-Man. He gets no respect in the superhero world, but that's all about to change as Marvel preps the tiniest Avenger for his big screen debut. So let's take a look back at the history of Ant-Man, or rather the Ant-Men. As always, we've got spoilers from the comics here. Who is Ant-Man? Okay, so yes, there have been 3 guys called Ant-Man in the mainstream Marvel universe, and director Edgar Wright's movie will feature 2 of them, Scott Lang and Hank Pym. Let's start with Hank, who was the original Ant-Man after all. Dr. Henry Hank Pym was created by Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, and Jack Kirby in Tales to Astonish number 27 in 1962. A straight-up sci-fi story rather than a superhero tale, Pym is depicted as a scientist who creates a shrinking serum, eventually known as Pym particles. He inadvertently winds up in an anthill, which must have inspired him because he returned 8 issues later as Ant-Man, now equipped with a costume and a helmet that enabled him to communicate with his fellow ants.
Land.
After that, Pym would continue to star as Ant-Man in Tales to Astonish, fighting no-good commies, petty crooks, and freaks of science. Soon he got an assistant in Janet Van Dyne, who of course became the shrinking heroine the Wasp, and his love interest, and by 1963 the pair also showed up in Avengers number 1, as founding members of the team. In fact, it was actually Hank's idea to create the supergroup in the first place, which obviously is not how things have played out in the Marvel movieverse.
Really?
But Ant-Man didn't really break out in popularity the way the other Avengers did. He continued to share Tales to Astonish with the Wasp until 1965, but he never got his own book, and he kept changing his identity. He went from Ant-Man to Giant Man, where he started to, make himself a giant, and others followed. Goliath, Yellow Jacket, stints as a non-costume scientist, and even his own spin on the Wasp. He also became a caveman once, but let's not talk about that right now. This inconsistency in Hank's portrayal would become linked to the character's emotional instability. For example, it seems the reason for his change to Giant Man in the first place was because Hank felt inadequate when compared to his fellow Avengers. Inadvertently creating the homicidal robot Ultron surely didn't help matters, and neither did his split personality disorder that surfaced and resulted in his darker Yellow Jacket persona. And then there was the infamous incident where he struck Janet, making Hank perhaps the first wife-beater in comics history. She divorced him after that, and so did the Avengers. For a while, anyway. And that's kinda how it went for Hank for many years, as he slipped from hero to sad sack and back again to hero. Hank Pym's the kind of guy who gets awarded Time Magazine's Man of the Year, only for it to turn out that that was actually the alien Skrull version of him. The real Hank never wins anything. Time will tell how Edgar Wright will depict Hank in the Ant-Man movie, but we do know that Michael Douglas will be playing an older version of the character. You gotta figure Marvel will lay off the really heavy stuff with Hank, and we already know that Ultron will be the villain in Avengers 2, but won't be created by Pym, who apparently isn't even in Avengers 2. But Hank's not the main character in the Ant-Man movie anyway. No, Paul Rudd will be starring as Scott Lang, who's actually the second Ant-Man from the comics. Lang first showed up in 1979 as an electronics expert working for Tony Stark's company. He also happened to be an ex-con who reverted to his old ways, stealing Hank Pym's Ant-Man gear. But he had his reasons. Lang's daughter Casey was gravely ill, and he used his newfound abilities to track down the only person who could save the girl's life, the surgeon Dr. Erica Sondheim. After this incident, Pym decided to let Lang continue on as Ant-Man, as long as he did so on the side of good, which presumably meant not building killer robots, not fighting the Avengers, and not beating up loved ones. Lang became a sort of part-time hero, always ready to help out the bigger players like Iron Man, the Avengers, and even the Fantastic Four. The latter association even led to his replacing the one and only Reed Richards as the leader of the FF's group, the Future Foundation. And Lang also briefly dated the ex-superhero Jessica Jones, who it must be noted is getting her own TV series on Netflix. Crossover potential maybe? And then there's Eric O'Grady, who apparently won't be in the movie but was the third Ant-Man in the comics. Also known as the Irredeemable Ant-Man, that title doesn't really sum him up. He's more of a bad guy who actually wants to be a good guy. Maybe he'll get his own movie, someday. But for now, 2 Ant-Men are probably enough for the big screen. We'll find out when Ant-Man kicks off Marvel's Phase 3 in 2015.